Welcome to the first part in a three-part series that we're producing with Waverton Investment Management. Today's topic is Pathways to Exit. It's going to look at new ventures and how owner-managers can build, scale and exit successfully, and some of the challenges that they might face along the way. We've got an expert panel assembled to discuss all the key ideas. But first of all, I'm going to come to Harry Cotton, who's the entrepreneurs lead at Waverton, to give us a flavour of the Waverton proposition for entrepreneurs and why this topic is so important for the company.
Well, hi, David. First of all, thank you very much for having us. The team at Waverton are really looking forward to being involved with and sponsoring this three-part series. So working with entrepreneurs and business owners is really exciting, and it's something we've done incredibly well for years at Waverton. But the world is changing, and we're looking to challenge that typical role of an investment manager under our new entrepreneurs proposition. The right investment manager can really add value to a client when building that vital, important strategic plan. And we believe developing and strengthening links with advisors, investors, and other entrepreneurs is key to effective succession planning. And once you have that plan, you can focus more time and energy on growth or positioning yourself for that exit. And that exit could be a number of things, whether that's a full exit from the business via a sale, or it could be a partial exit and looking to achieve diversification away from that business. It can also be anywhere from, say, a month to 5 years before the event. So for us, it's really about building the right team around that client. And we're kind of increasingly finding ourselves involved with the early stage entrepreneur community, whether that's through the Why Invest podcast that we run, or whether it's signposting the network of advisors who are willing to have that conversation well in advance of an exit. And I suppose ultimately Waverton will be there to manage that wealth and ensure that the success resulting from that entrepreneur's hard work is preserved for generations. But for now, it's about arming these future wealth generators with the right tools to build a resilient plan and to help them achieve their goals. So once again, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much for the background, Harry. And to get into the discussion, so Andrew Clarke from Charles Russell Speechley, early stage funding for new ventures often comes from friends and family rounds. What are the legal considerations at this early stage for a new founder?
Thank you, David, and also thanks very much, Harry. I think the most important thing for founders at the very early stage is to focus entirely on avoiding dilution and maximising value. It amazes me how often you see founders of businesses in early stage who've said, I'll sell you half the company at some price and then live to regret it. So I would say it's not really a legal consideration so much as a commercial one, which is put it off as long as you can before involving investors in your business, and just avoid dilution and do everything you can to maximize value. It also amazes me how often you speak to founders and they think that the business isn't worth anything, even though they've been toiling away for 2-3 years. And I say, what would you have been doing if you'd been paying yourself over that period? They've put tens of thousands of pounds of effort in, probably, and thousands of hours as well, and then think that it's a low valuation. But a project is almost as soon as it's conceived and is developed, starts to have value. So those are the main things that I would say. They're not really legal. I mean, we can talk about shareholders agreements and subscription letters later on, but I would say focus on putting it off as long as possible, David.
And just building on that, I mean, how does a sensible valuation get achieved at that early stage? I mean, you can see there might be projections with a hockey stick in terms of revenue, exponential growth. How do you kind of provide a reality check to those who are launching these new businesses?
I think that's probably more one for Adrian, but I would say to founders, take a number and multiply by 20, because whatever valuation you come up with, any investor's going to obviously do their due diligence and push right back on it. I think it's all about people are buying into the business plan at that stage. What's your future potential? And write a business plan that you can actually, set targets that you can actually meet. Those are the things that make investors very happy. But in terms of valuation, I'd defer to Adrian.
Okay, Adrian, are there any views as to as to how new ventures should work on that valuation, and particularly looking at on the friends and family rounds, how much equity to give away?
No, absolutely. And again, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. So I would push back a little bit on one thing that Andrew said there, in as much as, well, number one, I totally agree, you've got to bootstrap, and preserve the equity for as long as possible. Friends and family, by definition, are almost certainly going to be, shall we say, kinder investors than professional investors are. And they're going to be backing the individual, and individuals probably more than the business plan itself. The risk of pushing a valuation too high, too early, is that you're doing that, as I've just said, with less, let's just call them less sophisticated investors. And too often we find that businesses have overvalued themselves early on, whilst they're still at a stage of possibly not even having got a minimum viable product, an MVP, or let alone revenues. And then when they are looking to raise rather more significant sums of money and having to go to outside of their immediate circle, then people are saying, well, there's no way this is worth the valuation that has been put on it previously. So, it's an art, it's not a science at this stage, because the numbers are, again, as Andrew said, you can create a spreadsheet with a hockey stick, and what we advise is that you take a base case, you take a worst case, you do scenario building here, and you ensure that the base case excludes a number of key potential future revenue drivers. And one of the most obvious ones there, and we're slightly belaboring the point here, but is often data. Everyone loves to talk about the value of data. It's very hard to price the value of data, certainly at an early stage, but there are clearly some business models that if that data in due course could be extremely valuable to other parties.
Okay, thank you for that. And Charles MacFadyen, just to bring you in from Waverton, we mentioned that friends and family rounds are often the early stages of how these companies are funded. You might have clients who are have portfolios managed with Waverton, and what kind of considerations might they give to releasing some of those funds and investing into new ventures that are being pitched from friends and family?
Thank you, David. Yes, well, I mean, for wealthy families, I think one option which people have been using is Lombard loans. So it's a bit like getting a mortgage against a portfolio, and you can actually borrow at very attractive rates. We did one at the end of last year for an all-in cost of around about 1.5%, 60% loan to value against a portfolio. But that's really for sort of slightly larger seeding rounds. So I think that it is an option that some people have been looking at.
And it can avoid crystallizing capital gains and things like that. So
yeah, you're avoiding realizing crystallizing capital gains, and you can continue with the investments that you've got rather than having to raise cash.
Okay, thank you. And many new companies use EIS or SEIS in order to raise capital. Perhaps just to bring in Ben Handley, what are some of the tax benefits of these schemes, and importantly, how might these valuable reliefs be compromised? Many people know the headline rates, but it'd be great to hear a little bit about when things might go awry and the valuable reliefs might not be available to people.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, and hello everybody. EIS, I think, is incredibly valuable, and this is the relief that most people would look to target if there is a qualifying investment to be made. And as you say, David, I think everybody's aware of the headline factors. You can put £1 million into a business, or up to 2 million if it's sort of a particular type of knowledge business. You can get income tax relief on that investment, and then you can get tax-free capital gains when you come to sell as well. So it's incredibly, I suppose, appealing to an investor in the right situation. So you have to be a qualifying company, of course. And I suppose part of the beauty is you can get pre-clearance on that right to the revenue and get some assurance that it is a qualifying business. And then you'd hope that would be the end of the matter. I guess where the pitfalls would be is if you inadvertently stop being a qualifying business. You know, it happens with EMI. With EMI also, I've got a case at the moment where the business model is kind of changing and it might flip them out of qualifying status. So I think they're the things to be, just mindful of, that you don't trip up on the simple things.
But in general, the pre-approval will guide people so that they feel confident about it.
It will guide you, give the confidence, but obviously it's only going to be valid as long as you keep running the business as you have put forward in the clearance. So it doesn't give you a carte blanche to then go and do what you want. But obviously, if you run the business within the realms and with the spirit of the clearance you've got, then you should have great comfort that it's EIS qualifying.
Certainly. I mean, Andrew, do you have anything to add on that in terms of EIS and where people might go wrong unexpectedly?
Well, as Ben knows better than me, I think the SEIS and the EIS legislation is labyrinthine. It's got progressively more complicated over the years. I mean, we're members of the EIS Association, and I know that they're always trying to improve and make things more accessible for companies. I mean, there are little things, I mean, sort of obvious things, like there are connected parties rules, so you can't always have directors investing into companies. There are rules on families involved. Strangely, siblings can invest, but antecedents, parents and offspring can't. Ben's mentioned the length of the 7 years rule. So it's. I know you'd say, well, a lawyer would say this, consult a lawyer or an accountant, but it really is, unfortunately, a bit of a jungle. And the sad thing is, I think, in a way, that the companies at the time at which they can least afford to spend, money on legal and and accounting fees, have a sort of labyrinth to work through. I mean, a lot of cases, it's quite vanilla, and they'll get SEIS or EIS relief, but I think the issues probably come, Ben, you might agree with me, is more when you're looking for the funding. I've had client companies that have stopped, they've grown and they've stopped qualifying for EIS, and then they've had a bit of a difficult time, and they've requalified. So it's sort of a full life cycle there, really.
It is, and it does seem to be that the more valuable the relief, the more legislation, the more rules there are around it. Looking at recently sort of EIS versus business asset disposal relief, which is just a simple one, and then the investor relief, which has been with us 3 years or so, which not had much traction, which I think is probably part and parcel because you had to have ownership for 3 years to qualify. So we'd only start now seeing the outcome of that. But if you look at EIS, is by far and away the most valuable, but by far and away the one which comes with the most conditions attached.
Okay, thank you. And Adrian, just to bring you on the investment side, I mean, you've worked on many deals which are EIS qualifying. Can you tell us a little bit about a couple of those deals and what made them attractive to investors?
Sure. I mean, I think just standing back for a moment, the attraction to clearly, as Ben and Andrew have highlighted, from a tax perspective. However, I think investors need to, a word of caution here. There are too many EIS eligible companies that indeed get advanced approval and are eligible, where investors, the motivation for the investor is more about tax planning than it is actually about the potential return on that. And we've seen many cases of that where we just felt this is not a good investment. So I do think that people need to be very certain as one can do. They've got to do their fundamental research on the opportunities. Now, again, of course, one way to get around that is by not investing directly in a single company, but going through a fund and paying the fees that a professional EIS fund manager will have done the due diligence. No guarantee that they will get it right either, because ultimately it's a numbers game. So I would make that point, but I mean, to give examples of of course, one can point to success stories where companies have started with EIS. I mean, there were companies we've worked with that have gone from 4 or 5 years ago. One very exciting high growth consumer tech business. We first raised, I think it was £3 million at a 6 million pre-money valuation. That business more recently has been raising 45 million at a valuation in excess of 200 million, because they've seen phenomenal growth. So, that's been a success story on paper. Now, the investors, this is the other word of caution here. We ourselves are investors in this business. We all invested with a view that this was a 5-year story. Well, the reality is it's been a phenomenal growth story, but this growth looks like it's going to continue. And I think we're going to be locked up for at least another 3, 4, 5 years. So, again, you've got to look at the whole picture here and not just say, well, I get this fantastic tax relief. You've really got to look at your liquidity. You really got to look at your timelines and as I say, the fundamentals of the business.
Okay.
David, may I give a shameless plug for one of our, because I just picking up on what Adrian said, I think he's absolutely right about EIS funds, because we know the level of professionalism and scrutiny, due diligence, legal and accounting that these funds do is of an extreme level that just isn't possible if a EIS investor is choosing to invest directly into a company. And we've acted for Puma Private Equity for a number of years, and they have an EIS fund, and the range of companies from carbon car wheels to gentlemen's clothing and all sorts of things that I just think would be very difficult to access for the typical private investor. Sorry about the shameless plug for them.
No, perfect. Thank you for that.
I'm not sorry at all, in fact.
Thank you for that, for the extra context. That's wonderful. But Adrian, just on this question of can companies that are pre-revenue attract investment, or is this only in exceptional circumstances? Some of them hit the papers in terms of the valuations they can attract. But what's the reality that you see on the ground?
Well, take some of the biggest technology companies in the world today. Took many, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, any of these sort of names, they took years and years and years before they even tried to generate revenue. And just think about that for a moment. So they're not trying to generate any sales. They're merely trying to build a community. It's particularly so with the examples I gave, marketplace type platforms, where it's all about often a freemium model beginning. So let's just get people engaged. How many people on this call use Strava? I would suggest. And how many of you actually pay for it? Well, probably less than half of you. But that type of business model, they're not even trying to get revenues initially. But I would also add that if you are this notion of if you build it, they will come. It's got to be something pretty. It's got to be something pretty special for people to do that, or indeed you are a proven entrepreneur and a serial entrepreneur. And again, people are therefore not really looking at the business model, the business case, which so often pivots anyway. But they're looking at, I'm going to back the individual or the individuals here. Said all of that. An awful lot of businesses that don't fit what I've just described. Again, the general rule of thumb from the first of institutional money coming in, so whether that's a Puma or any of these other professional fund houses, is we need to see £1 million of ARR. So yes, I think revenues are very important for the vast majority.
Andrew, do you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, David, I have, but not. They won't attract the A round. The Pumas of this world. They're much more early stage companies. So there was a time, we can all remember the dot-com boom. Well, some of us can remember it. Some of us are old enough to remember it. And that was the time when the more money you were losing, the higher valuation. So I think those days are long gone. Okay,
thanks. And Ben, just to bring you back in, a new entity particularly in certain fields, technology involving a lot of research. Can you explain a little bit about how R&D tax credits might be useful to that company and help their cash flow?
Yeah, sure. So if you do qualifying expenditure in R&D, and this is you're sort of looking to solve something that you can't just fix readily off the shelf in a way, and it does crop up in all sort of manner of businesses. You don't have to invent the next sort of smartphone, as it were. I have seen it in rice products, in food products, and other things like that. So it can be more broad than you might expect it to be. But if you're qualifying, undertaking qualifying expenditure, for every £100 you spend of qualifying expenditure, that gets uplifted by 130. So your £100 becomes £230. And then you can either, if that's a loss, you can surrender that loss and get cash back. So it ends up that £230, that £100 expenditure becomes £230 enhanced expenditure, and you can surrender that back for £33. So you get 14.5% of the uplifted sum. So it can be, particularly in those early stage businesses where cash is king, a really valuable way to get some of that money back. With anything, you can only surrender if you've got a loss, and it's but also with 25% tax rates coming up on the horizon, if you don't desperately need cash now, there might be some thought given to, if you are creating losses, carrying them forward, because you might get relief at 25% of that loss, which becomes £60 of value to you, as opposed to the cash now. But I say very good. Another way the revenue are looking to, understand these businesses that they want to support, new sort of startup businesses, and a sort of really valuable incentive, which has been around for a while. It's changed a few times over the years, but it's been with us a long time.
Is it well understood in your experience by entrepreneurs, or are they leaving value on the table sometimes in this?
They could be leaving value on the table. I think, as particularly in those cases where they might not necessarily think it does apply, or you're so busy just running the business and not kind of thinking about everything else. And so I think that's the point, on all of us as advisors when we're speaking to businesses like that, something else we've got in our toolkit that we should just be at least raising. Have you thought about this? Have you considered it? And helping them, because it is, as you say, if you're incurring expenditure anyway, you are literally leaving cash on the table if you don't look into it. Okay,
thanks. And I mean, incentivizing, attracting, retaining top talent is a big part of the picture here as well. And perhaps you could explain, Ben, a little bit about EMI schemes and how they fit into the picture, what the typical parameters are, how a company might use an EMI scheme.
Yeah, so EMI again are another sort of a very attractive way to look to incentivise management. And there's a consultation open at the moment called for evidence or HMRC, where they're looking into EMI and whether it's, I suppose, fit for purpose, whether it's doing what it's set out to do, and whether it could be further refined and enhanced and so on. So at the moment, I suppose it's been with us since around 2000, the EMI scheme. And in a broad snapshot, it's a very efficient way of granting share options, which in the best of cases can ultimately give rise to a negative tax result in the round. So if you think about at day one, early stage of the business, you might grant an option for £1. You then come to sell the business when that is worth £100. That £99 is all subject to capital gains tax. You can get business asset disposal relief, as we call it now. I wish I hadn't changed it from entrepreneurs relief, but business asset disposal relief. So the first £1 million is 10% tax. So your £99 could be taxed at just 10%, which is about £10 tax. For that £99, your company gets a corporation tax deduction on. So currently 19%. So that's about a £20, £20 tax deduction. So the shareholder is getting 10% tax on sale. The company's getting a 20% deduction on the difference between grant price and option price, and it becomes very valuable and often sort of gets negotiated into part of the sale price because the purchaser comes along knowing there's going to be this super deduction in the company.
Okay, thanks. And Andrew, I mean, you often working on EMI schemes as part of advising your corporate clients?
Yeah, I mean, I would say pretty much if you're going to get a growth capital round from a sort of, like a business growth fund or any other event, a VCT, they are pretty much always going to stipulate in a term sheet that founders management must set aside a pool for employees, which I think is a very good thing. I mean, I think there's an element they obviously want to incentivize management, but I think they also want to get founders and senior management to focus on who the next layer of management coming through is. They often don't make actual allocations at the time of the investment. They'll just say that there's a pool and everybody will consent at the time to, the issue of awards. And I think that process of actually identifying the next layer of management coming through, puts management to the task of actually thinking who the succeeding managers are. So it's a healthy process, and I would say any manager in any business should always be looking over their shoulder, thinking who's coming through and what's the succession plan.
Okay, well, thanks for that. And there's a big question of how early new company founders should be looking for an exit. Would investors put money into a new company without a clear exit plan? I mean, perhaps, Adrian, you can give us a perspective on the time horizon over which new founders plan an exit and the different options that are going to be available to them to think about.
I think it's a little bit like having any work done on your house. Whatever the quote that you get from the builder is, it's going to take you twice as long, and it's going to cost you half as much again as you were as they told you in the early stages. Are
you talking from bad experience there, Adrian?
Can you see the scars from here? No, so I think the answer to that is, in all seriousness, you have to assume it's a 10-year process. You have to assume that. Obviously, it can be faster, but you have to assume that it's a 10-year process. Will an investor invest if they can't see what the exit strategy is? Well, again, let's just think about that for a moment. In very simple terms, there's three exit paths for any business. There's a public offering, so there's an IPO, there's a sale to a financial sponsor, so through private equity, or there's a trade sale. So saying at the beginning, well, I'm going to IPO this or I'm going to sell it to a PE company, I mean, yeah, maybe, but who knows? So forget those, because you really can't control those. So thinking about the trade sale, thinking about who are the strategic buyer, who could be a buyer of that business because it fits strategically into an existing business. That's clearly the area of focus. Now, surprise, surprise, those potential strategic buyers are also potentially competitors today, and or could be customers today. So you're thinking all of those things through. At what point do you want to open the kimono to a potential acquirer? Well, not too early on, because they might say, that's a really good idea. And you know what? We've got much bigger balance sheet than you have, and we could do that ourselves. So I think that's always, and very specifically, that comes to play, again, when you're thinking about fundraising, particularly post of Series A and into Series B, where you're starting to look at, of course, bigger sums of money, bigger valuations, and you're thinking, are we looking for purely financial investors, or are we looking potentially for strategic investors here? So an example of that being a corporate venture capital company, a CVC. You know, if it was a Unilever Ventures that might be interested in a food-related business, for example. Again, at what stage do you want them there? Because that you might want to sell your business to Unilever 5 years further down the road. So do you want them in too early, or actually having them there early might be these are all hopefully where the three of us on this call are adding value to our client in the dialogues that we're having and the advice that we're providing.
Thank you. I mean, Andrew, do you have a perspective on taking on that strategic partner and helping them further the business by taking on someone who can open up new markets and opportunities?
Yes, I mean, I think exits are words of bandied around. It's actually, I think it's something of a bit of a misnomer, really, because actually, really, when founders and entrepreneurs are realizing value, it actually usually represents a new chapter with a new partnership. It's very rare that someone takes a check and disappears off into the sunset. I've got a client at the moment that's in a sale process, and the sale process, for reasons that are not interesting, has been going on for far too long. And they had a private equity offer in January 20. The business is absolutely booming on the back of the digital economy, but the founding group are committed to the offer that they had in January 20. The business is probably worth 20-30% more now, but they see that particular offer, or made that offer, over a year ago now, as being the partner that they can work with, because there's a large chunk of, as they call it, vendor loan note that have to be effectively lent back to the buyer. So they need a business partnership going forward. They'll still take out a large amount of cash, but really it is a business partnership, and you need to pick your business partners very carefully in those circumstances, because it's a corporate marriage that you're going into, in effect. Obviously, you're taking some money off the wedding table, but I think that the circumstances, I'm sure Adrian would agree with me, there are circumstances where you just really get an exit check and go and lie on the beach. Besides which, entrepreneurs, founders, really, they don't have that. They don't have lying on the beach DNA in them. Normally, they want to go on to the next thing. So,
do you have a comment on that, Adrian?
I don't think I know a single one of our clients that would lie on the beach. And indeed, often they will have other ventures going on the side anyway, so they're not, they're often plural.
Absolutely. And I mean, Charles, just to bring you in, I mean, at Waverton, you often work with serial entrepreneurs. As has just been said, really, it's not about a defining exit. It's about, a portfolio approach, and, the time horizon to exit, per my original question, is, new founders can start with a very long time horizon. How do you work with that as a wealth manager, managing money for entrepreneurs over the longer term?
Well, I mean, I think to start off with, they don't need to invest a lot of money with us to tap into an enormous wealth of expertise. And we like building up that long-term relationship with our clients. I've got a call next week with a client who I will have looked after for 20 years. So unfortunately, we can't go out and celebrate, but we get to know each other really well. We talk to each other about our businesses. I enjoy learning as much from our clients who are entrepreneurs as they do about the way that we see the market. So I think what we can bring to pique their interest is we've got a really strong analytical team here. Most of us come from an analytical background. I was at Foreign and Colonial for 5 years before I joined Waverton as an analyst. We do a lot of in-depth research on companies, on sectors. We can talk about cycles. We can talk about the effects of different economic factors, and it really is an ongoing dialogue that takes place over a very long period of time. And hopefully they do learn a little bit from us along the way as well.
But it's not a kind of definitive exit. It's often like it's part of the journey, isn't it? From one venture into the next, and you're there supporting them.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a number of big families, wealthy families who own stakes in listed businesses, and we work very closely with them in order to reduce and diversify their exposure. And getting the timing right is sometimes they really have to be encouraged to let go. There's a sort of almost a rigor mortis grip on these shares because they feel as though they have to hold on to them. And actually, sometimes it is the right thing to sell and to invest in something else and diversify. So, we advise them on that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I've heard of patient capital, but I haven't heard of rigor mortis capital. That's the new one. Maybe that's the patient turning into a patient.
And Ben, slightly aside from the topic, but succession planning is also a big part of this thing. And as Charles was mentioning, it might be an exit is part of passing on the shares to the next generation. This is a topic we're going to take on in a future session, but I imagine it's a big part of work you do in analysing the tax side, is looking at the overall family's position.
It is, absolutely, and they have to go hand in hand, really. always, it's a terrible phrase, but the only certainties in life are death and taxes. And when you've got an owner-managed businesses, by definition, something has to happen with that business. It can't sort of carry on in perpetuity like a listed business, which just has continual change at board levels. So something's going to change, and whether that is an exit of sorts in full or in part, or indeed succession, bringing in, you know, next generation family into the business, or, you know, that's not always as clear cut. You might have one child who's very much in the business, one child who's not. Giving away equity comes away with other things, although you trust your children implicitly and you always hope they make the right decisions and will have happy relationships themselves. That's not always the case, as we know. And so you're always weighing up, you know, passing away equity, bringing the next generation, with balancing up those succession and wealth preservation needs, and probably managing, you know, everybody's expectations and wishes across the family as well. And then start to think about just passing to next gen, or trust ownership, or what type of, you know, structure would you like if you were to sell the business. As I say, people don't often retire, and so what would you do with that money again? So would you really want it in your own hands, or is there a case to be made for having a corporate sale and so you can reinvest there and go again? So I think all these things you want to factor into it. So it's not just about capital gains tax on exit, but so many other things as well.
Okay, well, we're going to get into some of those themes in later parts of the series. But Adrian, just to come back to you, you mentioned in the strategic analysis, looking at who might be a buyer for the new venture. You know, they can be a threat to the business, particularly they've got well-resourced, they've got deep pockets. So how do you find that a new venture can help identify and define its economic moat to help protect value, and so there will be something to sell in the long run?
Very good question. So, I mean, moats again are very important, obviously, as a major protection to not just create, but ultimately to protect value. Listening to Ben's comment, he has a fabulous moat because he focuses on one of the two certainties in life. Being death.
Yeah.
So, and taxes. So he's got it all covered. Fantastic. So I think, so what typically are those moats, and what do founders need to be thinking about? Well, it's by definition, it's what would make it hard for a competitor to do the same thing, particularly if they're better funded and deeper pocketed, as you said. So ultimately, those are things like technology, of course, proprietary technology. And again, trying to ensure that you get patent protection where you can. And a lot of businesses, early stage businesses, and I don't profess to be an expert in the world of patents, but a lot will question the value of doing that and the cost of doing that and the time associated with doing that. And again, things move in the world of technology so fast that you might patent a certain product and find that actually that is being superseded within a year or two anyway. But thinking about the moat, you're constantly thinking about your proprietary capabilities, which is largely technology, as I say. It might equally be exclusive, anything that's proprietary too. So it could be exclusive contracts. It might be, it's that type of thing. But certainly if, to state the very obvious, but if what you have is a Me Too product that could be easily replicated, then so what?
I mean, Andrew, on the legal side, in terms of protecting IP, patents and such like, creating that economic moat, I mean, what's your experience around helping companies, particularly say in the technology sector, defend that? I
would agree with all Adrian said about, I mean, and neither I nor Adrian are IP experts, but I think, I mean, under the general heading of exit planning, I know it's an oft-repeated phrase, but it's never too early to start exit planning. And I know I'm a lawyer, I would say this, wouldn't I? But actually, an M&A transaction is all about documents and documentation and being able to prove that your company is as it says it is on the tin, and you'll be amazed the number of companies that go charging into an M&A process or even a growth capital round without the preparation, meaning, you know, there are employment contracts that haven't been signed, there are commercial agreements they haven't even got copies of. I worked on a deal recently, we were acquiring a company, and the solicitors on the other side said, oh, there's some filing cabinets at the company. And we said, oh, well, how many are there? Oh, there's approximately 10. Well, can you tell us what's in them? No, there's no index. They've just been shoving paper in these filing cabinets. The company was incorporated in the late 80s. I mean, it is literally chaos. So in those circumstances, that sort of thing, if you make yourself kind of familiar with M&A process early in the company's life cycle, you just will not have that sort of thing, because pieces of paper that are 15, 20 years old will be thrown away, and you just won't even have to ask a question. But I can't tell you how much that will vex lawyers in M&A process, because that's information. I know that information is knowledge, but it can also be, you know, there could be some claims, or you don't know what might be buried in there. As it happened on that transaction, they decided in the end just to, we just put we were on the buy side, just put the whole set of filing cabinets to one side, and we moved on. But that wouldn't always be the case. The sell side was relatively tame there. So yeah, start preparing for exit almost the day you start trading.
Thanks. And Ben, on the tax side, I mean, we've mentioned the changes in entrepreneurs relief to business asset disposal relief. How should, bearing in mind what Andrew said about, you know, preparing from day one, how should founders consider, if it is a family setting involving family members, to maximise those reliefs?
Well, I think where the circumstances fit, then that is fine. So business asset disposal relief, you know, people probably familiar with the rules. 5% ownership in a trading company, held those shares for 2 years. You're an officer or an employee of the company. So the vital, well, a few tests there, but, you know, not to be missed is you've got to be an employee, officer or employee of the company. And that needs to be a proper role. It doesn't have to be a managing director role, but it needs to be a proper role. It needs to be a role you would pay someone to perform in the business. Yes, if husband and wife and grown-up children are involved in the business and they hold their 5% shares for the requisite period, then they could all qualify for business asset disposal relief. And again, it is something worth thinking about if it's not being done previously, and where there is that family involved in the business. If you think entrepreneurs relief's gone from 10 million to 1 million, so maybe if you had 4 active shareholders in the business, you get back up to 4 million in terms of total qualifying for business asset disposal relief. But it's, you know, if you qualify, you qualify. But I would just emphasise, you know, it needs to be a proper role.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to go for questions from our audience shortly. But just a final question. I mean, Adrian, you've worked all around the world. We're based in the UK here with, you know, a vibrant entrepreneurial scene. We've had lots of headwinds, COVID, Brexit. What's your assessment of the UK, so the vibrancy of the entrepreneurial scene in the UK as we go forward? Are you an optimist about the future, about the UK economy and its vibrancy and dynamism?
Oh, I'm massively optimistic. I mean, you're right. I've spent many years living in Asia and working in the US as well. I've been back in the UK now for 7 or 8 years, and I've been very excited by what I've seen in terms of, if you like, the entrepreneurial underbelly of the UK economy, and a lot of what my fellow guests have been speaking about here in terms of the tax reliefs and the incentives to drive risk capital into that market segment in the absence of bank lending and so on. You know, that's been a huge driver of that, and I think that's where the UK has been well ahead of many other countries. And as has been, endless column inches have been written, one of the positive outcomes of COVID has been the massive acceleration of some of the digital transformation and the adoption. I mean, look at us all here sitting on this call for the 300 and 60th day in succession or whatever it now is, we wouldn't have done this before, and we would have been all trying to coordinate schedules to get into a certain room at a certain time and a certain. So just a tiny example, but so I think I'm extremely optimistic, and if you just look at the volume of activity last year, I'm pretty certain I'm correct in saying there was something of the order of 12 billion, almost 12 billion pounds worth of venture capital investment in the UK. It was pretty much the same number as the prior year, despite the fact that in the second quarter of 2020, very, very, very little happened because everyone was sat deer in the headlights wondering what was going to happen.
Well, thank you for that. Charles, I mean, you see reasons to be cheerful in the UK economy and the entrepreneurial environment that exists in this country?
Definitely. I mean, I think that the UK has obviously lagged, and the UK economy was one of the worst hit last year. But the market looks quite good value at the moment, and one always sees interesting smaller and mid-sized companies coming up through. And it's trying to, I suppose what's been lacking in the UK market to date is those really good growth companies that you find in the States and in some other parts of the world. So, you know, hopefully that's what will come through from what we've been seeing.
Thank you. And before we break for questions, Harry, as we come to the end of this first session of three, were there any interesting parts there for you to draw out, or any thoughts before we head to questions?
Yeah, sure. I thought Andrew made a particularly interesting point, and something that we definitely echo, in that it's never too early to start planning. And also just echoing the sentiment around the activity we're seeing with our entrepreneurial clients. You know, as Churchill famously said, never waste a good crisis. And we're seeing a lot of companies and a lot of new sectors spring up, a lot of new businesses. There's a lot of new activity. I think we're going to be very busy over the next few months at least, and certainly beyond.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to taking some questions now live from our audience.